Well, The Price You Pay is a novel, my first novel. It's published by HarperCollins and came out last year. It's a novel based on Delhi, and Delhi is a principal character, the Delhi of the 80s and 90s and Delhi of today. So there's a conversation between the old and new Delhi, if you might like. But it's now being marketed as a crime thriller because the book involves a crime and a kidnapping. But what I have done differently than regular crime thrillers, it's not a whodunit. It's Delhi is looked at through the eyes of journalists, crime reporters, and other fellow journalists and policemen. The story is about a young boy, Abhishek Datta, who's new to the city, who joins a paper as a crime reporter, and his experiences and his shift to television and how that happens. So contrasts are set up. Newspaper as the old Delhi, television as the new Delhi. There are old policemen, there are young policemen. I try not to have a value judgment of the new or the old, but and try to reflect the realities of today, the globalization era, through different stories. So it's quite I have worked as a journalist for about 10 years. Having done that, I thought a journalist has a really different view of the city than most others, and we see so many different things. We meet different people in power, and slowly we become part of the power, and that's where the trouble lies. So this is the story, but basically from the very start till the end, there is a kidnapper coming back and a huge kidnapping about to happen, and that's the backdrop of the story. And but throughout it, we see this journalist and his growth as a reporter. So it's a quick read. Most people say that they finish it overnight, and I have enjoyed writing it very much. Well, the four principal characters to the book. There is an old chief reporter, and there is a young reporter who joins, and there is an old policeman, a deputy commissioner, and his young assistant. So it's very easily set up through those four principal characters. The old reporter believes in a certain way of reportage, a way of life, values. The young reporter, who wants his quick fix, believes in other things. The old policeman has his own set of values, and the new policeman has his. Honesty being part of it. The old policeman has his understandings of corruption and good cop. So this, in this similar ways, and so by how they live their lives, how they choose to live their lives, how they choose to work or not work, the stories are told. Also, the other thing is newspaper becomes a character in itself, the new print industry and the new television industry, and the new settings of Gurgaon, the old settings of IT or Delhi. So in these ways, I think the story is told. One side of me is an English honors student from Delhi University, and every English honors student wants to write a novel and write the great Indian novel. So that has always, since I was 18, I think I've always wanted to write a novel, but never really pursued it wholeheartedly. This particular story came in the form of wanting to write a film script, and an old friend, now a very famous filmmaker, Anurag Kashyap, has been wanting me to write a story about crime and policemen and all that. So in 2008, 2009, while in London, I started writing a few things down, and in a rush wrote a story in about 7 days. I came with this story to Delhi, and I was hoping to go off to Bombay and meet Anurag and have a chat with him, while I was waylaid by a very famous graphic novelist, Somnath Banerjee. And Somnath said, let's do a graphic novel out of this. And as I was thinking about a graphic novel, we did some sketches together, wrote a few things and stuff. And then I went to the Jaipur Literature Festival, where one of the people I was interviewing was Vikram Seth. And Vikram, over the time in London and stuff, we had got to know each other. And Vikram had a look at the script and stuff and told me to make a few changes, and I thought he was not even interested. On the sidelines, I was meeting V. Karthika, publisher of HarperCollins. Karthika was supposed to commission an ethnographic work on Indian elections, something I'm working on now, and I was going to meet her for that. So she came for the meeting, the first time I was meeting her. And once she commissioned me the book, she said, but I hear you have a story. And I said, which story? And she said, well, Vikram told me that you have a fantastic story. So I had this one paragraph. She took one look at it and said, do your graphic novel at your own time, but there is a novel in this. You have to recognize it. So in the space of about half an hour, I had a 3-book deal. Completely, came out bewildered from it. And once this was offered to me, I was really scared. I have to write it. I mean, I thought a graphic novel is easy. I'll tell an artist, this is the story, write it out now. But to write a novel took a different kind of patience, different kind of understanding of characters. So I actually sat down for 4 months. I stopped everything and thought and rethought the story. And the characters got fleshed out. Suddenly I knew who the characters' parents were, where they'd gone to school. I started traveling in India to find out their backgrounds and their houses. After I did all this, I went away to Germany, where I was working as a postdoctoral fellow in the beautiful city of Heidelberg. And I sat down for 9 months, didn't do any postdoctoral work, and wrote the first draft. I actually stopped talking to anyone, and my girlfriend thought I had gone mad, and I just stayed in one room and wrote. And that was the first draft. And then I came to Goa for 6 months and edited it. And after I did all that, Karthika said, it's shit, start again. So I rewrote the entire thing, and then she loved it, and we had a long editing session. So it took about 2.5 years to write this novel out. And there's a long-winded explanation, but novels must have long-winded explanations. For example, let's say the principal character, Abhishek Datta. Now, when I was writing the full script, Abhishek was the fall guy, whom I didn't like very much. He was a young Indian journalist, wants to get ahead, do well. I was very uncomfortable with people like Abhishek. But when I started thinking the novel, I had to find him in history, his location, his context. I didn't want him to be a Bengali from the parts where I belong, because I didn't want the novel to be autobiographical at all. So I went to a place I hadn't gone to before, Benares or Varanasi now, and located him there, found his parents there, saw how he would have come to be who he was, what his values might have been. I spent a long time in the city, went to the school he would have gone to, and charted the route he would have taken to come to Delhi. That was one. The older journalist character, I modeled it on 4 different journalists who were my bosses, their stories, but then I had to create the fictional Amir Akhtar. So I had to travel to his old Delhi house where he lived with his mother. His mother was a professor, a retired professor. So who were they, what were they? The policeman, the deputy commissioner, was again about 3 or 4 policemen I knew very well through my crime reporting days, and I had to mesh them together. Only the young cop was a person I knew very well. I modeled him directly, it was like a photocopy of the character. A very honest policeman, and a young one, dynamic, and en route to become the next commissioner of Delhi. And he was very young then when I knew him. Now he's an older man. So that was it. And much of the research, of course, has been the last 10 years of journalism, of knowing Delhi through ways where most people don't see Delhi the way a reporter sees it. So all of this mesh, 10 years of history, memory, investigations, reportage, all kind of meshed together. And this was one side. The other side was my academic side at the School of Oriental and African Studies. So I did my PhD on news ethnography and on Star News and Star Ananda. So much of the television work came from Star and Star News, meshed together with NDTV, where I had worked. So, both my investigative reporter stage and my investigative academic stage kind of worked together. I couldn't have written the book without the theory I knew, or without the practice which it is based on. I really don't know, and it beggars belief. And I thought I must write this quickly before somebody else does. With the Leveson inquiry going on in the UK, the close collaboration between cops and journalists, you think, why the hell has not somebody written about this before? And I'm glad that no one in India at least did, and so that I had the opportunity. And for me, it was a perfect setting. to write this book. I knew the policemen, I knew the criminals. I could see both sides of the story very easily. And why, yeah, as you say, why has it not been done? I don't know, and I'm delighted it has not been done. Well, because they're reporters, even if they get the news later, they're still first with the news because no one else goes and reports. So it's only the reporters who report, so that way. But it's a very unique relationship the reporters have with policemen. It's basically the fourth estate and the state collaborating. And that's the dangerous part. When policemen become primary sources, you basically are talking about a position where you stop interrogating power. You have to collude with power to get your stories. And this realization comes to me only when I stop being a reporter. We can talk about critical journalism, reporting which interrogates the state, but any kind of investigative journalism actually has to collude with power to be investigative. For example, you write a critical story about a policeman, let's say, and you think this is great investigative journalism. You can be almost 100% sure that another policeman has planted that story for you. You take that favor of that policeman, and you can also be 100% sure that the policeman who has been reported on knows that this other policeman has given the story and will do this favor to him the other day. So, by its very nature, state and fourth estate collude. And because of this collusion, status quo is maintained. The primary definers of our news are the elite, are the powerful. Wherever you go, whether it be politicians, whether it be industrialists, whether it be policemen, they are our primary sources. And as journalists, we have to, given the paradigm of news, we have to defer to them. One thing about new media is that all kind of technology was once upon a time new, say with telegraph or telephone or newspaper industry. So every time there is a new thing, say when telephone happened, when telegraph happened, there's a huge buzz around it. There's huge expectation and hope. And I'm also, I hate being a person who doesn't see things in context. So the context of technology is that while there has been hope, it has always been colonized by power. It takes very little time for Google to colonize the internet, and when Google colonizes the internet, it's corporations colonize. You have this vast virtual world which is not colonized in the beginning. But now that you see 10 years, 20 years of the internet later, it has been completely, not completely, there is anarchy as in the real world, but corporations collude. And having said this is the pessimistic critical me. Having said this, what has definitely happened is the modes of production which were in the earlier form of, let's say, old journalism, be it television or be it newspaper industry, were in the hands of the few. That has been opened up not to the masses but to a larger body. So I, with my technocratic know-how, can actually produce a newspaper, be it on the web page, as a website, but I can do that. So it has definitely been democratized to a certain extent. There are problems with this democratization. Too many people are shouting. Who gets heard? Does access to a computer mean that you'll be heard? Which NGOs can speak? Is it Greenpeace or whether there's a small NGO there? So even within those, there are hierarchies of power. Just because of Facebook, we haven't become a democratic polity. Well, I'm a bad seller of books. I could rather talk social theory, but if it comes down to it, I think, as most critics have, this book has got a very decent critical reviews in the newspapers. One of the things which journalists who have read the book and written the review have talked about is Delhi as a character. Delhi is a city, despite its great history, has very rarely been talked about in fiction. You could have a William Dalrymple write The Beautiful City of Jinns, but in fiction, unlike Bombay, Delhi has found less favor. So in writing this story, Because Delhi was so less written about, it allowed me to create, and for me it's basically a love story of an outsider. Now I come from a very different part of the world and came into Delhi wide-eyed and goggle-eyed really. So for me it's an outsider's love for a city. And once the outsider becomes the insider, what happens to that city? How do you see this city? So if anything I want to say about the book is, if you want to know a bit about Delhi, it's perhaps how it was and how it is going to be, this book is a good read. It's a good way to find certain, it's not an authoritative book about Delhi at all, but it's a nice patchwork, it's a nice kaleidoscope of colors about Delhi.